David Thornburg, President and CEO of the Committee of 70. Welcome to yet another edition of Studio C70, which is our chance to talk about the state of our local democracy and what we're doing to get ready for the November election with folks both here in Philadelphia and around the country. And once again, I am joined by City Commissioner Al Schmidt. Commissioner, welcome and thanks for doing this.
Yes, of course. Thank you for having me back.
I think this is the third in the series of our episodes together, and I think we can tell from the responses we get multiple hundreds, if not thousands, of folks tuning into this, and I think that interest is only going to grow as we get closer to November 3rd. So we have a number of issues to cover today, but I thought it might be helpful if you, on behalf of your colleagues, Lisa Dealey and Omar Sabir, if you might give us sort of a report from the front line and how the Commissioner's office is coming in preparing for the November 3rd election.
Well, as we've talked about before, we're really preparing for two elections at the same time, one mail-in election and all the logistics associated with that, and one in-person election on Election Day. The goal for the in-person election on Election Day is to try to have as close to a normal election as possible, as in having as many polling places open and as many election board workers working. So there's a lot of preparation that goes into that in terms of identifying polling places, moving all those polling places back to accessible locations again. And on the mail-in front, just preparation for what we're expecting, which is a significant number of registered voters in Philadelphia voting by mail. In the primary, about half of all voters voted by mail. And we expect that to be the same in the general election. It's just the turnout is going to double.
Yeah, that's an important point for folks to remember, is that there are twice as many voters likely to show up in and around November 3rd as in the spring. So within each one of those segments, the vote by mail and the in-person voting, there are endless topics that we could kick around. But in particular, I wanted to talk about the poll worker recruitment, which, as you know, is really critical to being able to operate in-person voting at or near full strength. So just give folks a sense of what the challenge there, and if you want to slip in a commercial and an advertisement for working the polls, the floor is yours.
Yeah, there's really two important pieces to it: the recruitment part of it and the training part of it. And we're facing different challenges this election year than we obviously have in the past because of the COVID situation and all the rest. On the recruiting side of it, it's a matter of reaching out to all of the election board workers who have served on election boards in the past to find out if they are willing to serve on Election Day in November, as well as setting up what will be trainings for them in a way that's different than how we typically do. Typically, we announce all of these election board training seminars across the city, and any election board worker can come to any of them. So we might have a dozen people or many dozens of people showing up to these seminars. We can't do that this time because we have to control the number of people in the same place at the same time. So it'll be a matter of reaching out to them for something more like small group training, as well as offering virtual training for service on the election board. As far as an advertisement, Election Day, as you know, comes down to those election board workers. They are the most important election officials in the city of Philadelphia on Election Day. It's not the commissioners, it's not the mayor, it's not anybody else. It all comes down to a couple of your neighbors serving to work on that board on Election Day for about 14 hours from beginning to end. And they can run for those offices, and if they don't run, there's plenty of vacancies where people can serve and get paid for their service on Election Day.
Yeah, and just to establish the magnitude, on a normal election, we might have a ballpark of about 8,500 poll workers in Philadelphia, right?
That's right.
What would you guess is the gap that you are kind of trying to narrow relative to the November election?
Well, I can't really speak to exactly where we are yet. The primary was a fraction of the number of people, and that was because we lost most of our polling places and we lost a lot of our election board workers for use on election day. So while we won't be able to have probably as many as we typically do, the goal is to get as close to that as possible, even though we're losing all of our senior centers, we're losing all of our firehouses, and all the rest. We reach out to election board workers to determine their interest, and many of them will say they're, I think the response has actually been pretty positive. It has with the polling places as well, and locations allowing us to use them again this cycle. But as these things progress, you'll have people change their mind and drop out, and people change their mind and want to serve.
Yeah.
So it's really a moving target until the very end. But the outreach is not going to stop until election day.
So you're simultaneously having to confirm the sites and confirm the people. You can.
And people want to know where they're going to work, right? Are they going to work at the church down the street, or are they going to work, 10 blocks away, someplace else?
Sure, and you can accept, reject, or just let me go on. But my guess is the nature of the gap probably is more in the thousands than in the hundreds. If you had to say, how many people do we have to recruit to successfully staff the polls in November? That we're not talking about we need another couple hundred, but it's more like we might need, again, in the thousands.
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely the case, or at least where we started after the primary. Especially because the presidential primary was pushed back from April, or it was pushed back to June. We lost a little bit of the time in between the primary and the general election that we used to prepare for the general election. So there hasn't been any break or any stop at all in any of these efforts all year long.
Yeah. Well, we've committed ourselves to working with you folks to make sure we can pull this off, and that's another area where we're quite willing to be helpful is to help recruit and get folks ready for to work the polls on November 3rd. This leads me to a topic that we have discussed before, but I want to come back to today. You said in an earlier episode, I said, well, what do you want from the state legislature that would make your life and your work more possible and more efficient coming up to November 3rd? And you said, well, I want certainty. And one of the things I suspect you want certainty on is whether you can recruit poll workers from different neighborhoods to serve in other neighborhoods. Because if I have this right now, unless you live in a particular division, well, if you live in a particular division, you can only work the polls in that division, and you can only be appointed 5 days out from the actual election, right?
That's right. And exactly what you're saying right now is one of the biggest challenges that we face is the certainty issue, the clarity issue. Like what are the laws going to be that govern the general election that's just a few months from now?
85 days to be exact. But
85 days. And there are a lot of tweaks and changes being considered in Harrisburg. I was hopeful that the legislature would return this week to act on them. My understanding is that they have not, and there is no time to waste, not a single day. Every one of these changes that the legislature makes has really significant effects on us and our ability to, for example, mail out ballots. I mean, you mentioned the polling place or the election board worker component, but just in terms of mailing out ballots, we've now just hit the deadline for third-party candidates to file, the deadlines for ballot questions and things like that, things that can change the layout of the ballot. But if the legislature changes what the laws are and what information we need to include on those ballots when they get sent out, it requires us to redo a lot. So we might print 700,000 envelopes, but if the legislature at the last minute changes some wording that we have to include, we have to redo all of that all over again. Yeah. There's no waiting. Like we have to and are pressing ahead. We can't wait for the legislature on this. We can't wait for court challenges to shake out. Like I said, there's no time to waste.
Sure. Well, that having been said, and I asked you this before, but it's worth diving into this again. What's the short list, the wish list that you, if the legislature can get convinced, controlled, or otherwise pressured to come back and act on behalf of not just Philadelphia, but the other 66 counties, what's the three item wish list that you wish they would pick up?
One is that we need to get ballots out as soon as possible so we can get ballots back as soon as possible. Once they come back, we can begin something called pre-canvassing, where we scan in the barcode on every ballot so that the voter gets a confirmation if they included an email address that their ballot has been returned. We check the voter signature on the declaration envelope and all of that. There's a whole lot of work that goes into before that ballot gets counted. So the sooner we can get ballots out and the sooner we can get them back, the more work we can do before Election Day to begin counting on Election Day, which is the real second part of this, is what work we are able to do prior to Election Day to prepare for those votes to be counted. During the primary, leading up to the primary, all sorts of articles about, Election Day is no longer going to be what it used to be. You're not necessarily going to know at 10:30 on election night what the vote totals are, because half of the ballots haven't even been counted yet, if no mail-in ballots are counted on election day. Waiting for hours, let alone days, is a seemingly intolerable amount of time to wait for results, and creates uncertainty with the system and a lack of trust in the system, and feeds all sorts of conspiratorial nonsense as well. So the other big part of it is the legislature allowing us to, at the very least, begin scanning those declaration envelopes, opening up those envelopes to take out the secrecy envelope that the ballot is inside, and preparing all those so that on election day, we can begin counting, 100,000 ballots in the course of that day, of mail-in ballots. So there'll be fewer ballots, fewer votes outstanding.
Just to be clear, you're talking about literally physical mail processing, like slitting the envelope, taking the secrecy envelope, get everything all stacked up. This is not, because some people have in their heads that somebody would be counting votes weeks ahead of time, and then word would leak out, and that would influence the election. That's not what we're talking about, right?
No, because of, probably more reasons than would even be bothered for me to mention. There's a whole process that's involved in this to separate the ballot, like how somebody voted, from who the voter is. So that ballot that you cast is inside a secrecy envelope, inside the envelope that you fill out and sign. They're then removed. Then the ballots are then removed later from the secrecy envelope. There's it's like we're running a mail house with hundreds of thousands of pieces of paper in play. No one is looking, no one cares, nor could they, to see how a specific voter voted. No one is tabulating, no matter how smart you are, tens of thousands of pieces of paper passing before you in the course of that day for what vote totals are or anything like that. That's
not
just
like someone has a piece of paper and they're making little hash marks about, the votes, the hundreds of thousands of votes that are coming in, right?
No, nor is that ever something that has arisen in other states that I'm aware of that have been doing mail-in voting for years now. Even if people were concerned that if we began scanning in ballots, not tabulating the results, but scanning in the ballots, prior to election day, even if we can prepare all of those ballots to get counted so that they're all ready to go. So the moment we can start counting, we can run tens of thousands and hundreds of thousands of ballots through the scanners to get results more quickly. That will be a big fix that the legislature can help us with to turn around those results as quickly as possible.
Yeah. And then one other thing I'd love your reaction to is the issue of, let's just call it, how mail ballots are returned. You had some experiences with drop boxes and their mobile drop boxes that we helped publicize, which is now subject of a lawsuit. There's an idea also floating around in Harrisburg that maybe counties should allow voters to return their ballots to polling places on election day, which would kind of make moot the issue of drop boxes if that poses some constitutional or some legal issue. But how do you feel about that idea of allowing voters to return their ballots to a polling place on election day? Or alternatively, where do you think this drop box situation is how is that gonna resolve?
There's a lot of different ways to fix a problem, and one of those problems that has, I think, been in the forefront of the news lately is the reliability of the Postal Service to deliver mail as expeditiously as the election code seems to think that it can be delivered. The legislature's timelines are almost like 2 to 3 days for delivery, when we're not seeing anything like that. And the post office is telling us and others to allow a lot more time for that mail to be delivered. That means someone's mailing an application to us, we're processing it, we're mailing a ballot back to them, they're filling it out, and they're mailing it back to us. So one way to kind of abbreviate that process is to allow opportunities for people to skip the component of it, mailing it back. Right? If the deadline to apply is 1 week before election day, they will not get their ballot in time, possibly, according to the Postal Service, to be completed and mailed back through the regular conventional means. And unfortunately, a lot of people do wait for the last minute, and they absolutely must not wait for the last minute. There is no benefit to waiting to apply if you're choosing to vote that way. So you have to allow some relief valves, I guess, for those
safety valves
ballots that can't be returned in the mail back to us quickly enough. And one of those is to have drop boxes. Another that you mentioned is to have, like we did in the primary, mobile kind of pop-up ballot collection locations where the Board of Elections is collecting the ballots directly from the voter right into our hands, so it's returned to the Board of Elections. In the primary, we had a couple of drop boxes at our Board of Elections offices as well. So there has to be like a way for people to get these back if there's not enough time to mail them back. Yeah. Or you get them weeks in advance and you're still uncertain that it's going to get delivered, or you have some concern about it being returned to us as quickly as it needs to be, and you can have that certainty of dropping it off at a drop box, for example.
Yeah. So let's put it. I think you've outlined a few things on your Harrisburg wish list. Let me end with sort of your reflection on this. You and I were saying earlier, we live in a time of rampant conspiracy theories. And I'm sure if you're, I don't know if you have a dog, you have a dog. If you're walking your dog, or if you're have your kids out or whatever, I'm sure your neighbors are haranguing you with their latest conspiracy theory and, Al, what do you think of this, that, the other thing? There is a conspiracy, a contender for conspiracy theories that says interest of, let's say, the president's reelection to to intentionally create chaos around the election. There was a couple articles about how the legal teams are gearing up and this is going to be an extended fight, which is all aided and abetted by a chaotic, contentious election week, and we all, those of us who are around, conjure up memories of Palm Beach County, Florida, 2000. How do you respond to, think about, counter that particular conspiracy theory?
Yeah, and it's funny, respectfully, I know we're on Facebook Live right now, but unfortunately I'm on Facebook, so every morning when I check it, I'm subjected to every possible conspiracy theory coming from every end of the spectrum that's total lunacy when it relates to election administration. Chaos is not good for election administration. Chaos is not good for voters, nor is it good for our republic, period. The more certainty that we can provide, the more confidence that people have in the system, and that they can cast their vote as eligible voters, and that vote is counted, is really critical to this whole thing working. So, sometimes it's a little like playing that whack-a-mole thing at the shore, because these kind of conspiracies pop up one after another. But there are things that we know that are true and things that we know are not true. We know that it's taking longer for the Postal Service to deliver the mail, the same way that we know that it's taking the sanitation department of the city of Philadelphia longer to pick up the trash. It does get picked up, the mail does get delivered, it can just take longer than it typically does. So there are certain things that we know are real and we can accommodate and try to alleviate or mitigate. All sorts of other conspiratorial stuff is so far out of the realm of comprehension for me that sometimes it's difficult to counter it on social media or in person.
Well, I suspect you would agree with this. I said to somebody the other day, I'm preaching the mantra of calm down, do your job as a citizen, and if that means treat the deadlines not as like, I'll wait to the last minute, but when I get my mail ballot, I got to turn it around pronto. Do what you can. I think we'd all be a little better off. So,
yeah, I agree.
Let me just close with a couple things. And again, thanks for joining us and hang in there. First thing is a commercial for what occurred to me is a three-number combination critical to success in November 3rd, and that's 1927-3. So October 19th is the last day to register. October 27th is the last day to request a mail ballot. And of course, November 3rd is the election. And as you said, Commissioner, we're expecting that we're going to run a full or relatively full in-person voter operation that day, in addition to the mail balloting. The other commercial that I'd plug is to take advantage of the Committee of 70's resources at wevote.70.org. We try to do our best to equip voters to get ready to vote and to answer all the questions that maybe you're uncertain about. And I know, Commissioner, you've put a lot of emphasis into the city's website, which is Philadelphia Votes, right?
Yes.
So there's a lot of stuff out there. And as I say to people, if you're still uncertain, just find your neighbor, your relative, people you go to church with or whatever, who you think is on top of their game, and ask them. That's always the simplest way to get a good answer, I hope. So, so Al Schmidt, thank you again for joining us. And I'm sure we will be talking to you in a few weeks. And as I said earlier, hang in there.
Thank you. And I just want to thank very quickly Committee of 70. Again, a lot of what we discussed today relates to uncertainty. And Committee of 70 is really second to none in getting election information out there into the hands of voters to help address some of that uncertainty.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that.